On a frigid Monday morning outside Denver, Connie Large Bennett gets a disturbing phone call about her son Bruce and his wife Deborah.
Connie's brother called her because Bruce and Debbie hadn't shown up for work that morning. Bruce and Debbie worked for Bruce's uncle. They were the regional distributors of Bassett Furniture. And so they tried calling several times and didn't get an answer.
Connie and Deborah's brother Larry had just seen the couple and their two young daughters, Melissa and Vanessa, the night before.
It was a celebration of Melissa's birthday. She was turning 8. I remember the kids laughing and playing, and, it was festive. Debbie made it special.
Connie was worried that something had happened in the home, so she raced over to the house. Nothing prepared her for what she was going to find inside.
They led me from the garage into the kitchen. As I entered, I looked to my right on the floor. I saw the body of Bruce Bennett. Bruce was struck about the head and face with a hammer, and I also observed that his throat had been cut.
We then entered the master bedroom, and there on the bed, I saw a female that was bludgeoned to death.
They took me into a girls' bedroom. I observed the body of Melissa Bennett, 7 years old. Melissa was also struck with a hammer, and she'd been sexually assaulted.
Every person who set foot in this crime scene, and they'd get pale, they'd choke up. There was a level of brutality that was really unheard of.
I was disgusted. I felt very bad for her that she had gone through this.
The brutal attack has left 3 dead. But there is a glimmer of hope.
I was advised at that time that when the fire rescue got to the scene, that Vanessa, who was 3 years old, was found between the wall and the bed.
She was clinging to life when the firemen came in. And they immediately grabbed her. They rushed her outside to the hospital and did everything they could to save her life.
Can you tell me your first memory of being in the hospital?
I remember the sticky things on my chest, the things that check your heart rate. I don't remember if I asked more than once, hey, where's my parents? I would assume that I would, as any child would. But I don't remember actually being told, hey, your parents are dead. I'm pretty sure I got the picture.
Detectives turn to the last people who saw the Bennetts alive, the guests at Melissa's birthday party.
Connie Bennett, that would have been the mother of Bruce Bennett, couldn't figure out why this had happened to her family. She said the birthday party took place the evening before. Connie was there, and then Connie's 2 sons, Richard and Daniel. They had cake, and they finally folded up around 9 o'clock.
I wasn't there that late, I know, because I had to travel the next day.
Richard told Connie, make sure you tell Bruce that the garage door is open and have him close it. She said she did, but Bruce, for some reason, didn't do it, and the door was left open. It was an easy mark, and I believe that's why he went in.
We never found the hammer that was used to commit the homicide. But there was a knife next to the driveway, which was in the snow, and that was used to cut Bruce Bennett's throat.
Crime scene investigators are unable to pull a usable fingerprint off the knife. In Melissa and Vanessa's bedroom, CSI discovers another crucial piece of evidence.
Investigators at the time found semen actually on the carpet that was underneath Melissa. And then we also found on a comforter that was covering her body, there was also semen on that.
We wanted DNA done on those items if they could do it. But you're talking about the mid-'80s. Our state crime lab, CBI, said they weren't capable of doing it yet.
January 10th, 1984 is when Patricia Smith was attacked in her home in Lakewood.
Patricia was sexually assaulted on the floor, bludgeoned around the head with a hammer.
Vanessa's head was bandaged, and her face, had multiple bandages on her face, and she was being spoken to by a therapist. And he was trying to ask her what had gone on.
I remember there was a time when I was younger and some people were asking about what did he look like. I don't remember anything. Nothing.
Once he started asking her about what had gone on, she became very, very agitated. And they just stopped the interview.
Detectives hit a dead end. They have no eyewitnesses, and the physical evidence they have can't lead them to the killer. "11 years later, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation is finally equipped to extract DNA profiles.
CBI found DNA which only one person out of 18 million could have deposited that DNA. They said, if you get this person, that's the person that did your crime right there. None of this DNA that came off these items coincide with anything from the family. Nobody in the family was involved in this murder.
Unable to ID a suspect through DNA databases, Chief Deputy D.A. Kellner and Detective Connor team up with Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, a genetic genealogist.
She would go into open databases that had the DNA information from like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and she would just start mining different areas looking for close matches to the DNA that she had.
Detective Connor shares the killer's DNA profile with Dr. Fitzpatrick.
She goes, I'll be back to you in a few days. It was less than a week, and she called back and told me. She gave me the last name of Ewing. That name had never appeared on any of the reports that I could find. And then on July 10th, 2018, at about 9:15 in the evening, I received a call from my boss. They got a CODIS hit on the Bennett case. I go, from where? And he goes, some inmate out in Nevada.
I got a phone call from Steve Connor. He says, you won't believe it. We know who our suspect is. He's been in prison since August of 1984. I said, well, what's his name?
The individual's name was an Alex Ewing.
Investigators pore over 58-year-old Alex Ewing's criminal record. They discover he'd been arrested just 12 days after the Bennetts were murdered.
Not long after the Bennett family murders, Ewing popped up on the radar in Kingman, Arizona, where he allegedly bludgeoned a man with a rock. He bludgeoned nearly to death 2 people with an axe handle. He was captured in Nevada, and he was ultimately convicted of that attack for attempted murder.
Okay, I'll jump right in. looking at several cases in Aurora wherein people were attacked in their homes. The evidence we have leads to you. Directly to you.
I mean, this is just crazy, man.
I think you know what I'm talking about. I can tell by the way you're looking at me.
I'm thinking about what you said. I'm like, damn, I'm thinking I need to talk to an attorney or somebody.
Ewing was charged with first-degree murder of the Bennett family, Bruce, Deborah, and Melissa Bennett.
Prosecutors are unable to try Ewing for the 2 hammer attacks in which the victims survived because Colorado law in 1984 assigned a mere 3-year time limit to file attempted murder charges.
So we ultimately decided from the statute of limitations perspective that we couldn't go forward with these other cases.
Prosecutors can charge Ewing with the Lakewood murder.
The district attorney for the 1st Judicial District in Jefferson County, charged with Mr. Ewing, has alleged that he also committed the first-degree murder of Patricia Smith from just a few days earlier in 1984.
Alex Ewing pleads not guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder. The Bennett case is first to go to trial.
Ewing's motivation for committing this crime was absolute bloodlust for violence. When I heard count number 1 come back as guilty, I knew the next counts would be guilty as well.
The jury convicts Alex Ewing on all 3 counts of murder.
The judge was particularly succinct, calling it an abomination, and sentenced him in Colorado to 3 consecutive life sentences.
Ewing is still awaiting trial for the murder of Patricia Smith. Pam lives in a small house on Lincoln Street with 2 roommates. She'd moved in just 3 months ago. But over dinner with her father, she admits she's already having second thoughts.
She says we're behind on the rent, and she goes, I'm tired of it, and I want to know if it would be okay with you if I moved back home. And I told her, absolutely. I didn't want you moving out to begin with. And I said, when do you want to do this? She said, well, I'm going to come to the house on Saturday and do laundry. So we finished having dinner, and she left, and that was the last time I saw Pam alive. Pam was born June 25th, 1969 at K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Pamela was the oldest of the 4 of us. Pam was very much outgoing. She was part of a group of friends that liked CB radios, and her handle was Dark Angel.
In June of 1988, she moves in with her best friend, Shelley Norgard.
I said, I'm opposed to that. You've got your own room here at home, you've got your own private entrance, but she did anyway. I was kind of upset about that, to be honest with you.
They realized they weren't able to afford the rent fully, so then they had a 3rd roommate, Jeremy Anderson, who had moved in with them. From what I remember, the 3 of them got along pretty well.
Monday came, and I called the place where she works, and I asked her boss, I said, is Pam there? And he goes, no. She didn't show up for work. So at that point, I called the police department.
I went to Pam's house with a sergeant by name of Bill Hobbs, and the door was answered by Shelley Norgard.
They found Pam's purse, her driver's license, medicine, all her personal effects were still there.
Bill Hobbs and myself sat down at the kitchen table with Shelley and asked her if she knew anything. And she said that she believed Pam had gone out partying. She wasn't really worried of anything happening to her. And she said that they had a joint checking account to pay the rent. And Shelley deposited her portion of it. And then Pam Pitts had emptied the account and wasn't paying the rent, and so she was a little upset about that.
Gordo's Pit is in a wooded area. It was a place that a lot of the local kids would go to party.
And so this one person is sifting through some refuse and he sees a human foot sticking out.
There was a big pile of garbage bags, and then laying on top of the pile was an unknown body that had been totally consumed by fire. Melted into the wrist bones was what appeared to be a bracelet, and you could make out just a couple of letters of dark and a couple of letters of angel on that.
There was a lot of trash around her and on her. The injuries to her body were gruesome. The sheer brutality of what happened to her was the most striking thing.
So we suspected that Pam had been killed and stored somewhere and then deposited on the garbage pile and burned.
Detectives turned to Pam's housemates, Shelley and Jeremy. They want to know where the two were on September 16th, the last day anyone saw Pam alive.
Jeremy's alibi was that he was at a football game that night, and that was kind of a significant event. And then he hung out with a couple guys. Shelley said that on the night of the 16th, she got off work, she went and picked up her boyfriend, Ray.
Who were you with the night of the 16th?
Ray, Don, John, and Terry. I don't know their last names.
And she said that they got done around 2:30 or so in the morning.
You sure you didn't take Pam out to the pits?
I'm positive.
So the police focused on that, talking to Ray clerks to see if Shelley was telling the truth, and they corroborated what she had said.
Detectives ask Ray to take a polygraph. He agrees and passes. With no new leads to fuel the investigation, like the dying embers of the fire that consumed her, the case of this dark angel's fiery demise grows cold.
I mean, they were pretty good about periodically updating me for a while, you know, and then as time went on, I wasn't hearing much of anything.
Yet this case, with all its strange twists, was about to take another odd turn.
There were some Embry-Riddle students exploring a mine out Iron Springs Road, found a body in a vertical mine shaft and reported it to law enforcement. The body was positively identified as Ray Clerk's. He had been shot in the head.
Ray was the boyfriend of Pam's roommate, Shelley Norgard.
To me, if you think that's a coincidence, there's something wrong with you, you know?
Police begin their investigation by matching tire tracks found at the mine entrance to a pickup recently borrowed by none other than Shelley Norgard.
Shelley was interviewed. At the time of her interview in the house, they found blood, and at a certain point, they walked up to her car and could immediately smell, I think they documented it as the smell of death. They found blood in the trunk of her car that ended up being, you know, the same type as Ray's.
Detectives also find a 9mm Luger revolver under the front seat.
So they actually had some physical evidence to charge Shelley.
Despite Norgard's not guilty plea, the evidence is stacking up against her. A ballistics analysis shows Shelley's gun is the same caliber as the weapon used to kill Ray Clerks. After 2 years of claiming she was innocent, Norgard reverses course and admits she murdered Ray Clerks.
But I believe she killed Ray in the apartment, and then Ray's body was in the trunk of that car, and it sat out there until Shelley was able to borrow a four-wheel drive truck, go to her car, remove Ray's body, put it in the truck, drive it up the mountain to that mine shaft.
Norgard is sentenced to 20 years with no parole. She's given credit for the 2 years she has already served awaiting trial. Her release date would be in 2011.
Shelley's conviction in Ray's death now paints Shelley in a whole different light.
42-year-old Shelley Norgard completes her sentence.
There had to be something we missed, so from day one, that was it. What did we miss? What do we have that will provide us the clue we need to solve this case?
All penal institutions in the United States, pretty much all of them, record phone calls between inmates and the outside.
There was a series of phone calls between Shelley and her father where there was tension insofar as her dad was concerned that she was going to be arrested immediately upon leaving the jail.
Hi.
Hi.
What's going on?
Not a lot.
He kept making reference to that night, referring to the night Pam went missing.
Well, that's what I've been thinking for 20 years, but then I don't know exactly. You've never told me what actually happened. I'm kind of up in the air again.
And she comes back.
I had a moment. I had a huge moment.
And then the line goes completely silent. That was a giant aha moment that actually led me to go to the county attorney's office and seek an indictment.
Hello, Miss Norgard?
Yes.
Sergeant Dart. Yeah,
It's Harmon now.
Okay, Miss Harmon, go down the seat. I'd like to talk to you about 1988.
Am I under arrest?
You are under arrest for murder of Pam Pitts.
What we decided on as a family, and I've taken a lot of criticism for this, is that we would offer her a plea deal where if she confessed to the crime and gave us the details of what happened and why, that she would be released on time served.
It was more important to get the confession and the conviction behind Shelley's name than it was for the time.
So we offered a plea deal, and surprisingly, she agreed to it. And so we went into court, and she stood up and she said, "I murdered Pam Pitts."
Shelley was upset with Pam because the checking account was overdrawn, and Shelley was really upset with Pam about her moving out because she couldn't afford to pay the rent on her own, and she didn't have anywhere to go. So Shelley was out looking for Pam, and she knew that she goes to Gordo Pitts for parties. And so when she found Pam, she confronted her. They got into a fight. She just, lost it.
She said, "I punched her and knocked her down and got on top of her, and I just kept punching and punching and punching until she stopped breathing."
And then she heard voices coming, and she realized Pam wasn't moving, and she left. That was Shelley's final story. That's all we got.
I don't feel that what Shelley stated in her allocution was genuine. She didn't have to say what happened afterwards, so we're led to believe that Shelley just left Pam's body out there and that somebody else came along and burned it and, desecrated her body. I mean, it doesn't add up.
She gave no other details, and we were not allowed to ask any questions. So the legal handcuffs, I felt, were put on us. Of course, if it were up to me, she'd be in prison for the rest of her life. But we don't live in a perfect world. She's a 2-time convicted murderer. And my advice to her husband is sleep with one eye open.
Some field workers were working in an almond orchard, approximately a mile from Highway 99. They came across a dead female. She was found curled up in a somewhat fetal position, and they called the sheriff's office in Kern County, who responded.
When the homicide detectives arrived on scene and they examined the young lady, they noticed that some of the facial features led them to believe that she may be Native American.
The victim was about 35 years of age, fully dressed in a pink top, blue jeans, and white, very clean sneakers. The front of her top was completely saturated in blood.
I had never seen a victim that was stabbed that many times. This was not an accident. The suspect meant to kill our victim. In examining the scene, the detectives saw that there were tire tracks, but there was no other footprints. So the investigators theorized that the young lady was killed elsewhere. It's commonly referred to as a body dump.
She had no identification, she had no jewelry, she had no purse.
When you don't know the name of a victim, a completely unidentified Jane Doe, you're not sure where to look for witnesses. It's very difficult trying to track those leads down. At the coroner's office, the coroner stated that it appeared the victim had been raped. Swabs were taken of the semen for collection as evidence.
She also had 2 tattoos. These were the most prevalent identifying marks that she had on her. She had one tattoo that was a rose. Above it said mother, and below it said I love you. And then she had a second tattoo that was a heart that had the name Shirley in it. Above it said love you, and below that said Seattle.
Janitors at Westlake High School received a call of a mannequin lying in the parking lot. They got closer and realized it was a young woman, partially disrobed, obvious stab wounds in her upper body. Her shoes were tossed up on the hillside. Bloody drag marks were seen in the parking lot. She had been brought there in a car and drug up on the hillside where she was found.
A second woman has been found dead, murdered the same way as the Jane Doe victim in Kern County.
She had on a light-colored top that was soaked in blood.
It was very evident that she had put up a fight. She had defensive wounds on her arms and her hands. She had been raped.
She had no identification. She had no jewelry.
Until she's identified, this victim will be referred to as Jane Doe Ventura.
When they did the autopsy, they learned that she had been stabbed approximately 29 times.
In 2011, I had retired from the sheriff's department and was in the process of being rehired by the district attorney's cold case unit.
Almost immediately, investigator Steve Rhodes takes over the Ventura Jane Doe cold case.
DNA evidence that had been collected in 1980 from the rape kit and from the victim's clothing was submitted to CODIS for analysis using the newer DNA techniques. The Department of Justice informed us that there was a CODIS match. They got a DNA hit on the rape kit from Jane Doe Ventura.
Finally, after more than 30 years, we had a match for a suspect.
That DNA match was to a convicted felon named Wilson Schuest.
Wilson Schuest is locked away behind bars in state prison, serving a life sentence for a string of sexual assaults.
And they also learned that there was a previous CODIS hit for Wilson Schuest to a Jane Doe in Kern County.
We called the Kern County Sheriff's Department and learned that Wilson Schuest is a white male who was born and raised in Louisiana. He was kicked out of the Army due to drug abuse and settled in Los Angeles.
It turned out Wilson Schuest was a serial rapist.
He was arrested in '77 for the kidnapping and rape of a young woman who he had left for dead. For that crime, he was sentenced to 2 years in state prison.
So in June of 1980, Wilson Schuess gets paroled, and he moves up to Kings County. He's only out for approximately 3 months.
Schuess was in the area right around the time of the Jane Doe murders. DNA shows that Schuess had sex with both victims. Investigators know that doesn't necessarily make him a killer, even with his record of sexual assault.
You never had sex with her? I don't know her.
So there's no way your DNA is going to be in this girl's clothing?
No.
In this case, the lie is as good as the truth. I asked him if he would voluntarily give us his DNA sample, and he allowed us to collect a DNA sample.
But Rhodes doesn't want to take any chances. He's looking for more evidence.
Steve Rhodes called Kern County Sheriff's Department. He gets their case file, and he notes that Kern County detectives did interview Wilson in 2008. During his interview, Wilson mentions that he's living with a family called the Bells for approximately 1 month, during the time period when the two victims were found murdered. Steve realized that Kern County detectives had never actually tried to track down the Bell family.
I started scouring phone books on the internet and ultimately landed on a small town in Oklahoma. I called the Oklahoma Police Department in this small town.
An Ardmore, Oklahoma detective heads to the address Rhodes provides.
The detective knocks on the door and says, "Do you remember a subject named Wilson Schuess?" It's 33 years later. And her eyes light up and she's like, "Have I got a story for you?"
I got very excited. So shortly after our phone conversation, my partner and I met with Mrs. Bell and her youngest son, Scott.
Scott says, "Is it because of that woman he killed in Bakersfield?"
Scott told us that Schuess had said he had picked up some broad in a bar, took her out to the country, and killed her.
Schuess told Scott that he then dumped her body in the middle of nowhere.
It all came together. This has to be Jane Doe Kern.
At his hearing, Schuess pleads not guilty. In July 2018, 38 years after the killings, Schuess is found guilty of the murders of the Ventura and Kern County Jane Does.
He was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life without the possibility of parole. But we still wanted to know the identity of these victims. We decided to do something I've never done before or since. We went to Wilson to see if he would tell us.
And he told me that he picked up Jane Doe Kern County at a bar in Hanford. He didn't know who she was. I asked him where he got Jane Doe Ventura County from, and he told me he found her hitchhiking in Visalia. I felt it was important to find out who these women were. And I'm sure there's some family out there that are wondering, where did she go? I want to answer that question.
In 2020, February, I was at a women's conference. I just, for once, thought, okay, I'm going to share. And I said, my Auntie Shirley's been missing since 1979.
A few days later, one of the women emails her.
She said, look on Facebook. And there was that picture that I seen, the one that they call Becky Ochoa. And I'm like, oh my God. And I said, I know it's her. I know it is her. And then when I seen the tattoos, I couldn't believe it. The person from Jane Doe Project asked me to upload my DNA. She said, it's her. I cried, I laughed. I mean, it was just crazy, a lot of emotions. Yeah.
When I heard that we had identified Shirley, I felt so good for Violet. But we're still trying to identify Jane Doe, Ventura County. With the DNA Doe Project, we have traced her family line out of Guatemala and into New Mexico. And it's starting to look like she might have ties to the Los Angeles area. I believe we're very close to finding out who she is. To give back her name, it just ends a pledge that I had made to all my victims. I'm going to do my best to seek justice for you. And that's my service to my community.